All right, welcome to our study of the Gospels as a part of our introductory study to the New Testament. I need to mention to you that a friend of mine developed uh, these slides for the PowerPoint on the Gospels. His name is Dr. Tommy South from Richmond, Virginia. And I'll be just making some comments about them as we go along. It's a very in-depth study of the Gospel, more than what we need for our introductory study here. And I'll bypass some of the slides as we go along, and others I will make comments on. But I wanted you to have the whole set because they're really well done, and they may be of benefit to you as you continue your studies in religion. These are about the four Gospels, and then we will also consider the relationship between Luke and Acts, because the same author wrote both those, and it's a continuous story of the life of Christ and what happened immediately following the ascension of Christ into the history of the first century church. Okay, this slide gives you a good statement about what we mean by the word gospel. We normally just say that the Greek word means good news. Initially, they're referring to the message about Jesus Christ, things that he taught, things that he did while he was on earth, as recorded by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Justin Martyr, the comment at the bottom of the slide, says that the Gospels mean the memoirs compiled by the apostles, which are called Gospels. But there's also a new sense, perhaps, that we should discuss, and that is that the Gospels form a genre, that is, a category of material in the New Testament that is separate and unique. And what we mean by that, that is a separate genre, is that it somewhat resembles biographies, but the Gospels do not set that forth as their purpose to just tell you the details from beginning to end, from birth to death of Christ. But there's something else behind it. And some of them cover precious little about his life. They cover the last part, especially the Gospel of John. And only two of them record the birth of Christ, and that's Matthew and Luke. So it's very different from normal biographies. It has a different purpose behind it. Um, One thing that I would say about it is, especially from the Gospel of John, is that he tells us that these things are written so that you might believe. And so the genre of the Gospel is unique in that its purpose, this category, is to produce faith, as John explicitly said in John 20, 30, and 31. And so it's unlike modern day biographies, even though it does tell us some details. It also leaves out a lot, and it is presenting only that which produces faith. And so this slide indicates that Dr. South has provided for us. Bulletin point number 1, its purpose is to create and or sustain faith. And his quotes from John 20 and chapter 21 show that the material was selected from a larger body of information. He even said that if everything that Jesus did were recorded, perhaps the whole world can contain the books that would be recorded. We also know from Luke's account that there were many other writers telling the account of Jesus' deeds and sayings. And he studied those and he presented it, he said, in an orderly manner, perhaps to suggest that the others were not so orderly, but that his was for specifically writing to a friend of his, a Roman official named Theophilus. And that word means lover of God. And so he must have been one who knew God. And Luke wanted to give him a more detailed, orderly account of what happened during Jesus' life, and that he got that material from those who were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, indicating that he was not. We need to understand that the Gospels, the documents themselves, do not name the authors. This has been supplied by the early church from the 1st and 2nd century and by Christian authors. So it is not based upon a statement made as it is found, say, in the letters by Paul and Peter. They will expressly tell you who it's from and to whom it is sent. And so the Gospels are very special. They're very unique and a very beneficial part of the New Covenant. Here's a very helpful um, order to remember about what we are receiving when we read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. First of all, the deeds and the words of Jesus occur first, of course. His life is ongoing there, and you had an oral tradition about it. That is, that they told others about it. And then they were written down by some, in fact, several, more than 4. And from those, we have received, from the multitude or several, we have received these 4 that the church believed to be significant and important and addresses various different groups of people or individuals, as in the case of Luke. The word gospel, again, going back to a definition of it, as Paul presented it in 1 Corinthians 15, he said, entails the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. And it also tells us that he continued to teach concerning the kingdom after his resurrection during that 40-day period between his resurrection and the ascension of Christ. So one very short definition of gospel is, a very focused definition is his death, burial, and resurrection, even though, of course, that it includes more than that in the record. This is a very significant prologue. Most of the letters and the Gospels of the New Testament have an important prologue, a beginning, an introduction. And I would ask you, as you learn to read and study these for your own personal benefit, to pay close attention to that prologue. When I was a student in school, a list of memory verses were given to us from each of the books, and the prologue of Luke was prominent on that list. Luke 1 through 4. And it is a powerful statement about what Luke is doing as he writes to his friend Theophilus. And he wanted Theophilus to know, and know for certain the things that had been presented to him, and that he could rely upon them, that they were true, and that they were statements about Jesus that would benefit him in his life. Now, this begins some of the things that I don't want to give special attention to or details to, and that is concerning which one came first. And there's so much that has been written in the last 2,000 years, especially in more recent years, about that and about who copied whom. That's really not material that we know. We can't say for certain which one came first or if one copied from another. We do know that they were influenced by the oral tradition of others and what others had written. But we also know that two of them were apostles, Matthew and John. And Mark and Luke were closely connected to apostles, and that they had firsthand knowledge of the life of Christ. And that is the case with all of the writings of the New Testament. They were either written by apostles or those who were close associates of apostles, and therefore were in that first generation of people who had this sort of intimate knowledge, detailed knowledge, accurate knowledge of the life of Christ. And so, as Dr. South indicates here at the last bulletin point, not all agree that Mark was first. And that's because we cannot be certain about which one was first. Just a word or two about the four. We refer to three of these as synoptic gospels, a Greek word which actually means they're similar. And they are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John is not similar to these three and therefore not a part of the group that we call synoptic. But Matthew, Mark, and Luke do closely parallel, though they're not exact at all. And so just as you hear these words that are used by scholars, you'll be familiar with their use. Synoptic referring to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I would also indicate to you that it is very beneficial that these are similar but not identical. If you were to be called along with other eyewitnesses in a court case, and only eyewitnesses can give testimony, by the way, for all the rest of us, we can only repeat what those who gave testimony have said. We weren't there, so we were not eyewitnesses, ear witnesses, or touch witnesses, as John indicates at the beginning of 1 John, who said that he and others were. But it is good that they are not exactly alike. And so we should not try to demand that of them and say, well, how come this account isn't exactly like this one? Is this one contradicting the other one? Of course, we do not believe that they're contradictory. But it is good that they're not exactly alike. If you had three witnesses in a court case who came forward and they used the exact verbiage, exact words that the previous one did, then something is wrong here. They have related information to one another. They're saying the same sentences. Something would be amiss and would be thrown out of court. You want the testimony to be accurate, but you want it to be personal. They are witnesses, and you need to hear what they have said. And that's what we have. We should be glad that that is the case. Here are several slides in a row that talk about the synoptic similarity, how close they are. They tell some of the same incidents that occurred, but in a different narration, a different way. Again, which is good. We should be glad that that is the case. Now, here's an area that you will run into as you continue your studies. If you go further into theology, you get a master's degree or PhD, you'll hear a good deal about the documentary hypothesis, about how they think someone put these together. And that has been studied and talked about at length, ad nauseum. And I don't want to present that because, first of all, it's something we cannot prove. Um, these were presented by German scholars, and the Q here, as indicated by Dr. South, from the German Quelle, means source. And so they're searching out sources for the writings of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And of course, once again, there's no such document that we can produce or that scholars have found that could be said to be the source that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John used. And so this is material that I'm not going to present to you now. You will receive it later if you continue in your studies. All right, since he continues here with this four-source theory, I'd like to conclude by saying how significant these four documents are, and to indicate, as we already have from Luke chapter 1, that there are others um, and that they're unnecessary. Um, we know that there were other letters written by Paul, for example. He wrote a letter to the Laodicean church, which we do not have. And he mentions that in his letter to the Colossians in chapter 4. So we should be aware that there were writings by these eyewitnesses, and some were included in the canon of the New Testament and others were not. But I wish to bridge here and go into Luke Acts for just a moment, because you have the same author, Luke, who's a physician. Paul called him the beloved physician in his letter to the Colossians, and was a companion of Paul and a very good helper, especially medically, to Paul as they preached and went establishing churches over the Roman Empire. But the relationship here with Luke Acts, as it was once called, if you put these two together, you have 28 chapters as they have been arranged for us, and 24 in the Gospel of Luke. So 24 and 28 together makes 52 chapters. So Luke Acts is an extraordinary document. And remember, first of all, on a scroll. And so if you had them on one large scroll, it would be sizable indeed. But what's beneficial about it is it's a continuous history. So here is a remarkable history of the events in Jesus' life in the Gospel of Luke, and then what followed in his record of Acts, first called Acts of the Apostles, but it's primarily Acts of Peter, first of all, and then Paul after his conversion. And so you have this extraordinary piece of material here as a part of the New Covenant. And perhaps we've not paid as much attention to it as we should, because it's continuous, it's a large body of material, it's very beneficial material. There's no other material provided for us that is found in the book of Acts. And that makes it important in and of itself, because it's one of a kind. Luke is not one of a kind because it belongs to this set we call the Gospels. But Acts is unique. And here it's connected to Luke's Gospel account. And so you have a wonderful an accounting of early Christianity in Luke, Acts. And if you haven't studied and put those two together before, now's a good opportunity for you to do that. I'll pause here and stop with just this brief discussion of the Gospels plus Acts. And of course, an extraordinary part of the New Testament or the New Covenant that we have with God. And even though the New Testament is very small in comparison to the Old, it's powerful. And it's one of the most important documents in history, and especially in spiritual history, how important they are to all of us. So thank you for being a part of the lecture and the class today. And this material you'll continue to study as you pursue your studies in theology.